Oh, all right. That'll be a little more comfortable.
Lovely.
All right. We are settled. That took a little while. It took a little while, kind of like getting a woman to squirt, right? We were, I was reading that in the book. And to pick up where we left off, I really appreciate your attention to the social, emotional, cultural factors that go into female pleasure, as well as the cultural history behind this practice as well. And your book, you really went into a lot of like East versus West kind of ideas about female pleasure, about relationships, about marriage, about gender roles. I really found it interesting. And I can tell you spent a ton of time researching for this book, because there's a lot of research studies that you mentioned that I also have already come across in my PhD studies, my research on female arousal and mindfulness. And then there's some more that I didn't even know about. So that was really cool to add to that. And for your book is not large, but the breadth and comprehensiveness of everything that you cover is quite large, I've felt. And you didn't put a lot of fluff in there. You really got to the point of what it is that you wanted to say and covered so much. I just think it's a fantastic starting point for anyone who wants to learn more about female pleasure, just satisfying sex for anyone, any gender. And also, you mentioned if you are somebody who is dating somebody from another culture, do your best to understand their culture and their context and where they come from, because that plays so much into the sexual experience as well. So thank you for putting out such a beautiful piece of art.
I appreciate your kind words, and it's always nice to hear when someone's appreciated the work that you've kind of put in, and you captured magnificently what my intentions was with the book, that yes, to amplify the voices of African women in particular. And also I wanted the book this is my 6th book, and some of my previous books I've kind of gone into a bit more detail with like research, and I lost a number of, you could say, everyday readers or the lay people. So that's why with this book I wanted to make it quite concise and get to the point, but then at the same time back it up with the research so people can appreciate that this isn't just me speaking or trying to like romanticize African culture or certain practices. I wanted to kind of show the research put into it, and then obviously to hopefully kind of share some of the contributions that African culture or Africans have made towards female sexuality.
And it's so beautiful, because I think one thing that you mentioned in your live shofar is that African people are often, over-sexualized or thought of as, very sexual beings. Whether that's true or not true, that's not the point, but it's the way that it's perceived. And you really brought the sacredness into the practice, which I that was probably my favorite part of the book. But also I've been diving into some of this other research as well on female sexuality, so I really, really appreciated the cultural aspects, and especially you really almost felt like you prioritized the perspectives of the Sengas, the female educators from Africa who teach this practice to, is it only females to females? Is that?
Yeah, females to females.
Yeah, so. Yeah. So I really loved learning about that. And I thought, gosh, I would love to be a Senga. Like, I wonder if maybe I was one in a past life. I don't know. Like, what a cool job. Like, it's like almost like a sexual medicine woman for the community, which is really beautiful to learn about that heritage and that culture. And then, and how important it is. And then you talked about like cultural appropriation too. And it got me thinking, there's so many ways that maybe Western culture has culturally appropriated, indigenous cultures or African cultures or different practices or things. Yoga is such a great example, right? Kirti and I have talked about this and what is considered cultural appropriation and what is appreciation of the practice. And I feel like if we use that similar analogy to sexuality and squirting, let's say. It's almost like squirting has been culturally appropriated from women too, you know, if women are considered a culture as a group, collective group, because it's something that, and I even checked this on Google to see if I could find any videos on squirting that were educational. And it was like so much porn came up. And then I found like one video that is a couple on YouTube that's doing sexual education. And I was like, wow, that's not educational. The porn is not educational. It's just getting straight to the main event, the action shots or whatever else. And all the sacredness and all of the context has been removed from the actual practice, which is such a beautiful, like, can be such a beautiful spiritual experience for a woman to have, and her partner as well.
Yes, most definitely. And I mean, you touched on many things that I wanted to kind of
Yeah, go
elaborate on, which I loved. I mean, the first part in terms of the sacredness of the kunyaza practice and traditional African techniques, that was something that I did want to kind of obviously explain, because when people think about kunyaza, they just think about squirting, especially since it's been popularized in popular culture with some documentaries and articles. And a lot of people's question is just how to squirt, or how can I get my lady to squirt, or how can I squirt? And squirting now has become, for some people, quite a form of sexual applause, especially for men, to boost our ego, that it's like a validation that I've performed well in the bedroom. And also there's unfortunately a lot of pressure on women to squirt, and it's kind of seen as I've reached a certain level of sexuality, when, as much as, don't get me wrong, I'm an advocate for women to squirt and to enjoy themselves in the bedroom. That shouldn't be the main goal. If a woman can squirt, that's great. If she's unable to squirt, but she's able to enjoy herself in the bedroom, that's the most important thing. And that's why with the kunyaza practice, the focus is female pleasure or women's pleasure. Mm-hmm. Squirting can come from kunyaza, so can an orgasm, but we know that there are many women who, for different reasons, which we can talk about a little bit later, find it either difficult to squirt or to orgasm. So I didn't want to put too much emphasis on the actual act of squirting itself or orgasm, because again, I didn't want women to feel pressurized that if they don't achieve this level of sexual pleasure, that they're somewhat inadequate, which again, that's definitely not the purpose behind the kunyaza practice or these traditional African traditions. And like what you mentioned about the fact that a number of Africans in the West have been sexualized, and I wanted to kind of reclaim the narrative, or in terms of when we think about African sexuality, whether it's in America or Europe, generally people think of either female genital mutilation or the highly sexualized image of the black man, mandingo, it coming from porn, when a mandingo, its origins, it refers to the Mandinka tribe, which is a honorable tribe in West Africa, not too far from where I'm originally from. And the perception of a Mandinka is very different. So if you would say Mandinka or Mandingo, the perception of the Mandinka people, Mandingo people, is very different from what the Western person would think of when they hear the word Mandingo. So it's also trying to reclaim that word as well. And similarly, the perception also of Black women either being highly sexualized, but again, if a woman's highly sexualized, that's fine if she's comfortable in her sexuality, but not when someone is dictating this is how her sexuality should be like. And that's something that I think we don't hear many Black people, Black women in particular, kind of speaking about their own sexuality in their own terms. And that's something that I wanted to do. And obviously people might be asking the question, but you're a man and you're speaking about women, and that's plays into the whole patriarchy. But because there aren't many, unfortunately, writers speaking about traditional African practices, and when I spoke to a number of Sengers, I looked at this as that this is like a sacred trust, and they're telling me their secrets. I'm originally from Nigeria, which is in West Africa, so even the kunyaza practice is not where my family is originally from. So even me hearing about it and coming to learn about this culture, initially I was thinking, should I actually put this in the form of a book? But then I was thinking, if I don't, there's not, maybe it might be appropriated by Westerners, or the face of kunyaza might be lost. And a number of Sengers I spoke to, they said, as long as you honor our tradition and you're not just going to focus on squirting and make that the kind of like the goal, then by all means, just make sure it's what you're right to make sure it's kind of like a holistic practice. You're speaking about the sacredness of sex. So yes, kunyaza is traditionally was taught by women to other women in order to prepare them for marriage, also even women that are married. And it was really kind of like a love practice that people engaged in a love and committed relationship, either via marriage or what have you. So it wasn't just speaking about squirting itself, but it's speaking about the whole practice and the importance, the role that the Senga plays, not only in teaching kunyaza, but in teaching consent, in teaching sexual ethics and other things about sexuality, which again is not that maybe interesting to the modern reader. They want to kind of hear about squirting. So I understand, even when I'm promoting it, I understand most people are going to be intrigued by squirting because of the recent obsession and fascination with squirting. But when I get people's initial attention, then I'll bring about the sacred practice, and that it's not just about squirting and orgasm itself, and then also telling people that women shouldn't feel pressure. I think women should obviously feel entitled to pleasure and to squirt, but at the same time, we shouldn't put pressure on women that you have to squirt or else you're somewhat inadequate or anything like that. So that's why it's quite like a double-edged sword, because I'm trying to promote it, but at the same time, I don't want people to feel like this is like the epitome of sexual pleasure, because it may be for some women, but it may not be. But at the same time, I think, unfortunately, which I'm still kind of struggling with, I'm not sure why a lot of people, both men and women, shame women who do squirt. Like, a lot of people want to say it's urine, and this is why, and this is even something which I tell a number of men, is that, can you imagine that when you're making love with your lady, that you've got these reservations that I can't do this, I can't fully let go, I can't fully release because I might urinate, I might do this, I might do that. A lot of men were able to be uninhibited and be free in the bedroom. And when I told men that if you knew that this is what your partner was going through, how do you think of this, what you was going through? How would your sexual experience would be? And a lot of them, they know that it wouldn't be as enjoyable. So it's kind of relaying to men that because of the stigma attached towards, like, not only orgasm, but female ejaculation in particular, a lot of women, when they reach the point where they think they might squirt or ejaculate, but because the sensation for some women feels similar to peeing, they hold back. And if you've got that in the back of your mind, you're not even able to fully let go when you're supposed to be in a blissful experience kind of thing. So I wanted to kind of educate men as well, because there's a number of women out doing great work, but there aren't enough people speaking to men in a way that they can understand. And I just think the way that men, we consume education, especially like sex education, it kind of differs to women. I'm generalizing here, of course, but so that's why it was a thing of like, how can I send this message where men can understand, so they could, so it's good that women are empowered, but then men need to be able to help women feel empowered, because again, I'm speaking obviously in the context of heterosexual relationship. Men need to be able to make the woman, their lady, feel comfortable in the bedroom. So that's why my message is like twofold. It's obviously to women that they feel entitled to pleasure, and obviously it's to men to make sure that their lady feels comfortable and trusted and loved, so she can fully enjoy herself in the bedroom.
Absolutely. And I think you do a beautiful job of conveying all of that in your book. Like, that was very loud and clear to me as a reader. And also I had watched, your live with Shafar, and I've been following you for a little while now on your page now as well, and some of the other little, things that you're putting out. But you say it in a way of, like, especially being a man who is talking about female sexuality, it's delicate, it's a sensitive topic, and it's sensitive to be a man coming in to tell a woman's experience or story or whatever else. But it makes total sense to me. And you said something to Shafar like, well, I'm a heterosexual man, so of course I'm interested in female pleasure. And it is something that I have researched. It is something that I've experienced, that I know something about. And that makes total sense to me. I feel absolutely you have a right to speak. And also in your book, you say, it's very clear that you are elevating the voices of women, and you even call out the I think you called it the masochist, or not the masochistic. I'm thinking of something.
Machismo.
The machismo medical culture, the machismo medical system, where it's this sort of ego of, well, research says this, and we're not listening to the experiences of women. And they're saying, this is not pee. I know it's not pee. I know what it feels like to pee. And this is just it's not the same process. And I've talked to friends who have friends and followers who have messaged me since I started advertising this talk, and they're saying, oh yeah, I'm a squirter, I love to squirt, I know it's not pee, like and this is how I know, like I've done it with an empty bladder, I've done it and then gone and emptied my bladder right after sex, like it's not coming from the same place. And I thought another thing that was so interesting in your book is at one point you were like, where is this mystery fluid coming from? And there's like hypothesis, right? But it's still sort of kind of, a mystery. Like we don't know exactly how it's happening. And even that, isn't that phenomenal? In a time where our iPhones can read our thoughts and can read our, and market us these different things. We know so much about tech, but we know so little about the female body and the anatomy of the female body. There's so little sex research. I know you're a sex researcher, I'm a sex researcher. There's really not a ton. And that says something right there.
It is. And I think, like what you said, I think it's important. And especially for many people who are obsessed with science. One, I do appreciate science, but for me, a woman's testimony is more legitimate than someone sitting in a lab testing the urine samples or the fluid samples of women. Do you know what I mean? So for me, I think I prefer to listen to this, and every woman's experience is different. And even that's why I wanted to relay some of the research where it's proven that, female ejaculation or squirting is urine. The sample size is only 7 women. So you're going to get a sample size of 7 women in France and it wasn't even conclusive, that study that was carried out in 2014. And then say, because of that study that was carried out in France, now we can say categorically that female ejaculation and squirting is P, when there are hundreds of women, if not thousands, by their own self-reporting, their own testimony, they have told you that the experience is different. They've told you that it doesn't look the same, it doesn't smell the same, it doesn't taste the same. Isn't that enough? And then that plays into, like I said, like you mentioned, the machismo culture, where for some men that's not enough. I don't need to hear what women, and we're invalidating the women's voices. And I'm saying, even when we're speaking about whether you want to call it negative patriarchy or the machismo culture, we perpetrate both men and women ourselves.
Absolutely.
Because when I'm hearing some people saying that, and again, maybe there's some women that are against squirting, and I'm like, what's your issue with squirting? It's because, and one woman I was speaking to, a close friend of mine, she said, because she hasn't squirted, then it doesn't exist. And I was like, why are you validating another woman's experience just because you haven't experienced it? If you haven't experienced it, it's fine. No one's saying, and that's why I said in the beginning that you're inadequate or anything like that. I'm not saying that, but because a woman's experienced this and she's telling you her experiences, shouldn't her testimony be enough for you to kind of believe and listen to, rather than you need to wait for a male scientist, most cases, to kind of validate her words? So I just wanted to kind of bring that to light, because that's something that I don't think, especially because there's a lot of stigma around squirting, that many people don't kind of think about. It's like we're waiting for the validation of, most times, another man to kind of validate a woman's experience. And it's just something that, again, is quite problematic.
And then how that attitude generalizes into humanity in general too, right? Or not acknowledging another person's experience. They're saying, no, this is my experience because of research or because of stereotypes or prejudices or whatever else. It's just sexuality really gets to the root of humanity, I feel like.
Even when we're, sorry, you're right. I mean, even if we're speaking about orgasms as well, it's the same, that it's very difficult to measure an orgasm, as in the level of intensity and pleasure. It differs from not only person to person, but even the same person in different times. It can feel differently depending on various factors, and it's very difficult for you to pinpoint why this orgasm feels more intense than another, and why. Do you understand what I mean? So, but we realize that we have these different experiences, but we all label it as an orgasm, but there's some that are more intense, more pleasurable than others. Now, if we were to categorize it and say, I don't know, this is like the magic orgasm, or this is the bigger, this is the small one, or whatever, then how can you then use that to quantify it or to categorize other people's experiences? Because it might be slightly different. So that's why, again, as much as when we're speaking about orgasm, I think it's quite broad that we haven't categorized it yet, which is good. I think we need to adopt a similar approach when we're speaking about whether you want to call it squirting, gushing, ejaculation, and what have you, because now there are scientists that differentiate between the two, that they'll say if a woman expels fluid, which is a small amount, which is equivalent to like a teaspoon and it's clear and it's fluid and it's watery like, then it's true female. No, then it's creamy like, sorry, then it's true female ejaculate. But if it's a large emission of fluid and it's more watery like, then that's squirting, and then that's probably urine, they'll say. But if it's somewhere in the middle, some are now even saying it's gushing. So people are given all of these categories, and then again, I think one of the problems with that, and although I relate in the book, it's not something that I like to speak about a lot, because then some women will then maybe try to measure themselves against what is being categorized by someone else, and their own experience may be totally different to how someone's categorized these different types of fluid. But ultimately, whether there is small traces of urine in the fluid that women expel, whether there is no fluid, urine at all, whether it contains a bit of sugar, whether it doesn't contain any sugar, whether it's pure in terms of transparent and watery, or whether there's a little bit of cream in it. These are all different types of body fluids that we should kind of celebrate. And even the man as well, again, I'm speaking in the context of a heterosexual relationship, they shouldn't feel like appalled by it, because unfortunately there are some men, it's like men are of two camps. One, they love it and they're waiting for women to squirt, or they kind of see it as like, this is like hideous. And again, it's those type of men that I'm trying to kind of like change that mindset, that why are you appalled by something when this is a beautiful, blissful experience, and it's something that it's not pee, so you don't need to worry about. And even if there was traces of urine in it, do you feel the same when you ejaculate? You're not repulsed by your own fluid. So why should you be repulsed by the fluid that's emanating from a woman's loins?
Absolutely. How do you have any sense of how this got to be such a common practice in Rwanda? And I think you said Uganda too, right? Is it also is practiced there somewhat?
Yeah, so the practice, according to legend, again, how true this is, I'm not too sure, because it's a bit of a folklore tale, that hundreds and hundreds of years ago, a queen was, she wanted some special attention, let's put it like that. Her husband was away in a military expedition, so she summoned one of her guards to make love to her. The guard was worried and he was terrified, and initially he was saying, what about the king? And then the queen said, if you don't come and make love to me, I'm going to have you executed. The guard went towards her, and then he held his penis in his hand, and he was trembling because he was worried about obviously the potential consequences if the king came and saw him. So he was trembling, and again, this is what the tale says, is that he was striking his penis against her vulva, and that resulted in a gush of fluid to emanate from her yoni, shall we say. And then that caused the Lake Kivu in East Central Africa to be formed. And then after that incident took place, then it said that the queen told the king when he came back, this is how I want you to basically satisfy me. This is how the kunyaza tradition was born. Kunyaza referring to the tapping technique in which to stimulate the clitoris and the labia minora in order to result in kunyara, and kunyara refers to the gush or the squirting fluid. Now, since that, again, how true that story is, but it's relayed and told in many villages in Central Africa, that has now been passed down from women to women, who are known as the sengas, which you mentioned earlier, who are known as the village aunties or the maternal aunts of women, and they will teach women about kunyaza practice, about sexual ethics, about consent and things like that. And that's now spread to Uganda, Burundi, Kenya, where it's in Kenya and Uganda, the kunyaza practice is known as kachabali, but it's one and the same. And in parts of Zimbabwe, it's known as ketero. And now the kunyaza practice has spread to parts of Nigeria and West Africa and parts of Ghana. And in recent years, because there was a documentary that came out in 2016 called Sacred Water. Now kunyaza has been practiced in parts of America, in parts of Brazil, even in Germany, France, and the UK. So, and there are now like modern day sengas, like even based in the United States. There is a fabulous sex educator, which you probably should definitely check out if you haven't already, called the Village Auntie, Angelica Lindsay Ali. So she's reviving the kunyaza tradition in America, and and what I love about the work that she's doing, she's obviously not just speaking about the practice itself, but she's speaking about the sexual ethics and the spirituality around African sensual practices, not only kunyaza, but you've got kaya mata, which is a tradition which refers to natural aphrodisiacs from Nigeria, and you've got African waist beads and other African practices. So there's women like now modern day women who are kind of reviving not only the kunyaza tradition, but the tradition of the sengas, or the village aunties.
That's beautiful. I love, especially, you know, like the consent and all of those super, super important things that go into becoming a sexual human, an adult, and growing into that life transition, that phase of life. And that is lost over here, in my opinion, in America, because even, you know, I consider myself coming from a fairly sexually liberated family, not overly oppressed by religion, at least in my immediate family. And yet, since I started my dissertation topic on female sexuality in 2015, 2016, I lost most of the family members. Do not follow me online anymore because they're ashamed of the sexual content that I put out, or, you know, things that I do. And I don't take offense to it. I get it, but it also is sad. It's just kind of telling where our culture is at. And even advertising this video today, you know, can every woman squirt? I was kind of bracing myself for some backlash or like some shaming or whatever, but nothing came this time. It was all really positive and people are really excited. So it just tells me that there's a lot going on underground that people aren't really allowed to talk about. There's not validation out there. I think I read in your book that squirting videos was actually banned in the UK and porn or something like that, which is like, I couldn't figure out if that was like a good thing or a bad thing. So I was like, the squirting videos that I've seen on porn over here, Pornhub, is like, I think it actually is peeing. Like, I don't even think it is squirting. I think it might just be peeing, which is probably a lot easier for them to do quickly, right? So I don't know. So I'm like, they're probably not learning very much from porn anyway. But it's interesting. Why would it be banned?
Yeah, so in the UK, squirting is banned because it's considered to be urination. That's why. Oh. And then that goes into invalidating women's experiences, and that's the problem where they don't have an issue with the money shot. You know, so if I'm, you know, that's the reality. No, they don't have an issue with that. But a woman, whether she's expelling a small amount of fluid or large amounts, we don't want to see that. That's revolting and that's disgusting. So again, that's why that plays into the whole idea of like controlling female sexuality, which again is problematic. But you are right that a lot of the porn videos, a lot of the squirting scenes are like probably urine. But I wanted to go back to something you mentioned earlier about growing up in like a religious household and where sexuality is shamed. I grew up in a religious household, obviously a Muslim household, but half of my family are Christians. And for me, religion is sexually empowering. But again, it depends what religion you're speaking about. Mm-hmm. And also, that's something I wanted to speak about with the book and my other previous works, is that when we speak about religion or what it means to be sexually liberated, I always ask the question, what religion are we speaking about? Because if we were to look at the Kama Sutra, which is a religious textbook from a Hindu perspective, that a lot of people celebrate as like the book of sex and sexual pleasure, that's written by a man who was known to be a religious man. I think he was celibate as well, and he's speaking from a religious perspective. If we were when we speak at the Kama Sutra, people won't speak about it being a religious book, but a lot of his sources or inspiration was from his religious tradition. When we speak about even a recent book like The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman, he is a Christian minister from my understanding. So his understanding of even like the importance of love and intimacy, that was from his understanding of Christianity. Now there are unfortunately a lot of religious people from different religions who have used it to control female sexuality in particular, or they feel sex is something that's to be ashamed of. And so for me, is it the religion or is it some religious people? And I differentiate between the two, because I don't feel religion has restricted or ashamed sexuality, but I do think a lot of religious people have. So I do try to kind of distinguish between the two. And then even when we're speaking about what it means to be sexually liberated, I find maybe not for men, but maybe somewhat for some women, they're under pressure that, again, if a woman wants to have multiple sexual partners, and she's an adult first and foremost, and she's given consent and she's happy with that, that's up to her. If a woman wants to be celibate for whatever reason, and she's happy with her sensuality and her sexuality, that's fine, and she still could be sexually liberated. And also a woman who wants to be in a monogamous or committed long-term relationship, and she owns her sexuality, she can also be sexually liberated. But now when I hear a lot of people, for both men and women, speaking about what it means to be sexually liberated, we only hear someone who maybe has multiple sexual partners. And then there's pressure on women and men who maybe for whatever reason just want to have one sexual partner, or they want to save themselves for whatever reason, whether it's religious reasons or cultural reasons, they are still sexually liberated. And unfortunately, we don't really hear that perspective. So like, even when people think about marriage, even for a lot of men, it's like sex ends when you get married, or good sex ends when you get married. And that's a problem in my view. And that's why when I came across the kunyaza practice in the tradition, was like, this is a culture where for them, pleasurable sex and enjoyable sex, you can have that in a long-term relationship, on a long-term marriage. So the idea of, good sex or enjoyable sex or fun sex is when you're young and free and single or dating. But then when you're in a long-term committed relationship, that's when sex is boring, sexist marriages, you lose desire. It was totally different in that culture. So that's why for me, even for myself, born and bred in the UK, my understanding was somewhat, okay, this was not something that I'm kind of like used to. So that's why I wanted to, raise, shine the light on people who are kind of showing sex or pleasurable sex, because I think there is a difference between sex and pleasurable sex. I think a lot of people are having sex, but not many people are having enjoyable, pleasurable sex, both men and women. And I think that's something that, if we speak more about pleasure and even like sexual happiness, and are you enjoying the sex that you're having, I think we can have more open and honest conversations. But when we kind of just speak about sex, then it's easy to measure how many times are you having sex a week, how many for men, or even for women, how many sexual partners have you had, how attractive is your sexual partner, how many orgasms you've had, how many times have you squirted. All of these you can kind of measure. We love to measure things in the West. Right. Whereas if we're focused on pleasure, then it's obviously more holistic. It's about quality as opposed to quantity. And that's something which, again, I was quite fascinated when I came across a number of, like ancient cultures where it's not just, they're not focusing on the number of sexual partners or sex itself. It's more about the pleasurable experience.
Yeah, and I mean, my PhD is in, I'm in the dissertation phase. I've been in 7 years, but the PhD is actually in integrative health. It's mind-body medicine. So it is marrying kind of this, whether you want to call it East and West, holistic versus linear, quantifying versus qualifying. It's really, where do we find the balance of that? And the more that you look into it, let's say in the sexual arena and in cultures, you see it everywhere. You see it in medicine, you see it in research. It's lopsided, right? And so I feel like really focusing on female pleasure is a way to just, one way to start to come back into balance. And you mentioned early religious roots. Every early religious research study that I've read or book on it, it's the early roots of it is they're all egalitarian. Islam, Taoism, Christianity, it was all meant to be, an egalitarian, but as you said, somewhere along the line, somebody came and flipped the script for political power or money or to control or dominate, or maybe had to do with land or owning, a woman's body, or it's been hypothesized in one of the books that I showed in my little promo video, Good Sex, was that it had to do with women's sexuality really not being understood, and almost kind of scary for men who weren't having such a intense experience maybe, or weren't feeling it the same way she was, and then like, oh wow, we can't, that could be dangerous in society. And we look back to even the early roots of Freud and psychology. It was like women who were not having orgasms and were so sexually frustrated were called it was hysteria. They were hysterical. We still use that word. She's hysterical. She's just so sexually frustrated. And I'm telling you, if you're on that, verge of squirting and you just can't because it's not, it's the pressure, social pressure, or your partner is like weirded out about or whatever, that's hysteria right there. That's like, there's that energy is going to build up. You need to have some sort of release, right? And then also, like, side note, I guess, to that is, if you're just focused on making a woman squirt, but you're not paying attention to the pressure that builds up the dam before it bursts, like, it's just physics. How's that even going to happen? Right? And so there's so much that goes into it that the two of you together are creating, but also what your book does a fantastic job of talking about is all the cultural context, like you're talking about now too, that goes into the way we're raised in our kind of subconscious programming and that sort of thing that we have to unwind and look at. And really, once we do that work, I mean, it's so valuable. It's so, and Shafar and I talk about this on one of our lives, is that if everybody was just having really great sex, I just think we'd have world peace, because everybody just be blissed out. Be like, that's not that big a deal.
I do agree with that. I think a lot of people that do crazy things are sexually frustrated. A lot of people. I think that plays into but that's another conversation altogether. I have that conversation with a couple of friends of mine. But I do agree with everything what you said, and I just think we just need to adopt different sexual scripts, and it just can't always be about penetrative intercourse. And I think with a lot of men, I think one of our, because it's like a contradiction. I think a lot of men want to please their partners, but at the same time we are somewhat intimidated by female pleasure or female sexuality, because a lot of men, we place a lot of value on not only the size of our penis, but the virility of our penis. And if we're not able to satisfy a woman, we feel that we're somewhat we're insufficient as a man, or inadequate as a man. And then because of that with porn, because of what we've heard on the TV, because of even like what we've read, and everything is about penetrative intercourse, we're just focused on how long we can last, how big we are, and how much the woman can kind of scream kind of thing. When a lot of that, that a lot of women are faking it. But as long as it satisfies our ego.
I think it's 75% of women have faked an orgasm, I think is what the research says,
But if you were to ask men, I think about 80% of them will say no woman is as faked with me. That's the thing. So we've got this weird, like we don't want to believe it. We don't want to hear it. So we think, maybe that's for everyone else, but not the women that I've been with, kind of thing. And it's a thing where even like with Freud, what he said about is it clitoral orgasms are immature, and then the vaginal orgasm is for like the real woman. And again, when you've got that from academics, respected people, that, well, I'm not surprised that if obviously with porn you're just going to see penetrative intercourse as that's the main course, so to speak. And it's quite funny that even with a lot of men growing up from adolescence, you may be thinking about, obviously before you engage in penetrative intercourse, it's fondling, it's kissing, it's fingering, and things like that. But when you actually start having sex, all those foreplay things, that's not important. It's straight about penetrative intercourse. So as men, like a lot of men, again, this is what people say, whether you want to call it locker room chat or in the WhatsApp groups and things like that. If a man has relations with a woman, but he hasn't penetrated her, if he's done everything apart from penetration, it's kind of seen as he hasn't slept, he hasn't pleasured her. Mm-hmm. Even if a man, I was speaking to a couple of my friends 2 days ago, and someone said they're making fun of someone who he performed oral sex on his girlfriend at the time, but he didn't have sex with her, and then they were laughing at him like, what kind of man are you? So even if a man performs oral sex, she experiences an orgasm, if you don't penetrate her, as far as a lot of men, this immature understanding is that you haven't pleasured her, you haven't had sex with her. So that's why I think women understand it's different when we're speaking about sex or sexual activity or sexual pleasure. It's broad, it's not just about penetrative intercourse. Whereas with a lot of men, it's just one way. So that's why I think we need to open up again a lot of men's attitudes in terms of understanding sex and pleasure.
And women and men both. I mean, because we're both in the dark. Women, we don't know how our bodies work either until we accidentally stumble on the magic sauce of like a eureka moment, but we're not taught this, And so especially if we're letting a man take the lead and we're expecting him to know how to pleasure us when he's, in our younger years or whatever, and he's not been taught except for porn, porn is, what they teach in porn is just not compatible with female sexuality and the desire cycle that happens with women in general. Not saying that a woman can't be turned on by porn, but it's more focused for the male gaze. And so if you're doing those things and a woman is not able to come to orgasm because those are not the things that's going to turn on, we think we're dysfunctional, right? And or, you know, there's intimacy issues, or we're not being romanced. I mean, that's a huge part of it, is feeling nurtured. If you, I don't know if you're familiar with Gina Ogden's work. She was she's researched sexuality, spirituality, and she had the largest survey of spiritual sexual experiences, and she studied extraordinary sex. Like, she wanted the mind-blowing, transcendent, you know, sexual experience. So she studied those folks that were having that kind of sex, and she researched people from age, I think, 20 to 75, and the majority of her participants were married 25 plus years, and they were reporting, like, you know, all of these extraordinary sexual experiences. And she kind of like figured out the commonalities in all of their experiences, and you know, publish that research. And so it kind of gives you, because it gives you a snapshot of understanding that what is often required for women is also good for men. It's also fun and intimate and wonderful for men, although they can also probably bring themselves to orgasm in other ways. And then the other piece too is that a woman can actually physically orgasm but not be satisfied by the sexual experience. Yeah. And that's another piece that we don't often talk about.
100%. And that's why, again, I think that's something that both men and women do need to be educated on, that it's not an orgasm or squirting doesn't necessarily mean that the experience is actually pleasurable or enjoyable, because that's something that, again, maybe because of porn and other things, that's what we kind of place too much focus and emphasis on, when a woman or a man can have a pleasurable experience without even orgasm or without even ejaculating. So that's why I try to focus more on pleasure, but I understand that in the culture that we're in, people kind of we're quite goal orientated, both men and women. So you kind of want to know, okay, how can I achieve this? Don't just tell me how can I achieve pleasure. How can I achieve this? So that's why. But, you know, I will mention like squirting or orgasm, but then when you kind of bring people in, then you can talk about, like you mentioned, about having like a full body experience, where it's more about pleasure as opposed to reaching like a squirt or orgasm. But in saying that, what would you think? What would you say are the key things that are holding? I know you're interviewing me, but I kind of want to ask you the question. What would you? Yeah, what would you say are holding women back from squirting? Because it's something that both men and women are fascinated by and are interested in. So, and I believe that every woman has got the capability to squirt, but I don't think a lot of women squirt for various reasons. What would you say, maybe, I don't know, the top 2 or 3 reasons that inhibit or prevent women from experiencing squirting?
I think number one is like what we're talking about with the same thing that keeps them from orgasming, is just being in their head too much, or worrying about, you know, what's happening, or, oh, does he like me, or is this a safe situation? I think, you know, that's what Gina Ogden talks about too, is safety is number one. So emotionally and physically safe. So you want to have that, that trust, that openness, to feel that he's present, that you're being nurtured, that sort of thing, which I think you touch on also in your book, like creating that safety and that clearing the space. I think you referred to it as like clearing the space and making sure that there's not a whole bunch of jumbo mumbo and all the stuff in her head. And then, yeah, the worry about it being pee, just the misconceptions and what her partner might think, because when you feel that urge coming, it's similar to the sensation of having to urinate, but then it's different. And sometimes, I mean, for me, I was very young, and I actually had I had a couple experiences of squirting before I even had an official orgasm, because I know there's a difference. Sometimes squirting comes along with an orgasm, and sometimes it's separate. And you talk about that in the book as well. And it would happen when I was a little bit drunk. So being younger, I think it was because I was more relaxed, being drunk, but I was also in a very long-term committed relationship. So I felt safe and nurtured and all of that stuff in that partnership. And he happened to be, pretty well endowed, so that it hits the spots a little bit easier too. And so, but I also thought, oh my gosh, how did that happen? How was that pee? But then I'm like, how, it can't be pee because I have to pee afterwards. Like it's still like I still have pee like a ton afterwards. So it couldn't have been pee, right? So and then, that piques my curiosity. But I think, after all these years, there's still that misconception. I've talked to men, I talk to women, oh, it's just pee. No, it's not. It's a different sensation. It's a different smell. It's a different, everything. And so I think women just are afraid to let go. And I also think that the more comfortable a woman is with her body, and this is another thing that Gina Ogden talks about, is like this self-esteem and this feeling good about her body. That is probably one of the most orgasmic things. That is a woman's biggest orgasmic potential, is being comfortable in her own body. And so right away she's up against culture, right, that is telling her what she should look like and whatever else. And so if her partner and her lover can compliment her, like, oh wow, you're beautiful, or look at your sexy hip, or whatever it is, or just authentic, of course, and then just even noticing like how her body is shifting as she gets more turned on. It's like, women thrive with that kind of attention. And I think that a lot of men do it. I think men are really good at that because it is authentic and they are very turned on visually by their partners. But if they're skipping that step, they're really missing out on, something that can turn the dial from 2 to 10. And then she also has to believe it. She has to believe that he's telling the truth, that it's genuine, and be able to receive that. And so that's where, what makes sense with like Lizzo's videos, everybody's like, she's doing too much, like what's going on? But I get it. It's like she's celebrating her body, and because she's doing that and she's letting everybody witness it, she's probably having some rocking orgasms, like in the bedroom. That's a big part of it too. So it's just really being free to come as you, no pun intended, come as you are, and just let go. I think that's the biggest thing. And I think it's hard. Like people sometimes, like my clients will sometimes ask me how to squirt, and I'm not a sex educator in the sense that I can tell people techniques. That's never been my thing. I'm into the dynamics, the energy, the emotional context. My background is as a licensed marriage and family therapist. So I look into relationship dynamics. And you mentioned it in your book too. Once the sex is gone, the marriage is gone. I think somebody had said that. You were quoting somebody. And I tend to agree with that, from personal experience, and also in the couples that I've worked with. If that's gone, that's a big piece. So, there's a lot that goes into a woman's sexual response. And another thing in the research too is every woman is different. And that can be hard for men who want to learn how to pleasure a woman, or it can be super exciting because that's novelty. Every woman is different. You're going to have to figure out the maze, or how to unlock, that unique key. And for me, my turn-ons, what I desire, changes throughout the years as well. So what does it for me now didn't do it for me 10 years ago or 20 years ago or whatever else. So we're homeodynamic humans. And, again, cultural context shifts, our relational context shift. It's really quite exciting. And again, like a metaphor for life. How do we stay open? How do we find pleasure amongst the shifting plates of life?
Do you think it's changing culturally, especially in the West? The reason why I'm saying that is because I don't know if you came across Pornhub. They had like a closing the orgasm gap.
Oh, they did?
Yeah, they had this. It was a couple of months ago during is in August because of International Orgasm Day. So what they said is like 40% into a porn video, they'll stop it, and then the purpose of stopping the video was so men will understand this is now, you're now feeling the frustration that a number of women feel like not being able to orgasm in the bedroom, and then I think they did some questions or something just to kind of educate men about the importance of making sure that they pleasure women in the bedroom. And then Playboy recently, they've also they've released like a 3-part series about closing the pleasure gap and trying to teach the importance of making sure women are experiencing orgasm and pleasure in the bedroom. So even in like porn websites, like they're now, some of it I think is a bit of a trend, if I'm honest, or maybe I'm a bit of a cynic in some respects, because I mean, how much, if you're stopping a porn video halfway through and then asking a couple of questions, is that going to make men more selfless lovers? I don't know, without really educating them and informing them about female desire and female arousal and female anatomy. I'm not too sure, but there does seem, well, culturally, because now there seems to be more of a an onus placed on ensuring women are pleasured, which is a good thing. And because I think men, we hear it or learn about sex differently, maybe sometimes you might need to hear it from some of those avenues that maybe traditionally if they go to porn to kind of learn about sex or to be miseducated about sex, at least they kind of, if they're hearing about the importance of making sure the woman's pleasured in the bedroom and things like that, then maybe they might try to have open and honest conversation with their partner and try to explore her body. Because I think one thing you did say, which I really loved, is that even as a sex educator, I don't like to focus on techniques. Whilst I present some techniques, it's ultimately, it's a guide. It's a guide that you're presenting of different techniques or practices that you can use to explore with your partner. So it's not about if you do A and B, C will happen. And that's something that I always try to tell people, because people try to think pleasure or orgasm or squirting is formulaic. Like if I do kunyaza, is she going to squirt? And it's like, no, it just doesn't work just like that. Like you spoke about the importance of making sure the woman is mentally aroused and physically prepared before, and believes in that she can squirt and believes in herself, that and is in love with herself and is relaxed. That's the most important thing. But that's not as easy to sell as squirting kind of thing, because people want the end result, but then you have to work their way back to the importance of, like you said, about self-love and things like that. So
yeah, and she's already, you know, feeling herself. He doesn't really have to do too much to get her there, you know, that like, and I mentioned size, and you talked about size, but size doesn't really matter, because fingers, and even in lesbian relationships, you know, fingers like work just as well as long as you're hitting the right spot. And you talk about in your book too, it's I love how you mentioned the G spot was named after a man, so you tend to not want to use G spot, and you called it K spot because it's also the other end of the clitoris, so it's like the whole branch. So you have the basically like the external clitoris and the internal clitoris, and stimulating the internal clitoris is what can cause the squirting and the gushing, but it takes a while for that to swell, you know. And even the vulva, if men are paying attention, you know, and doing all of the things, foreplay, which is mental as well, it's romance, it's all of these things, you know, he's going to see it start to swell and expand. And I think a lot of men don't even know that. They're either not watching, or they just don't know that happens. And that's a beautiful thing. And that's part of like acknowledging her beauty, is telling her that I'm noticing this now, or I'm seeing this. And Mama Gina talks about this from the book Pussy, Reclamation. And she has she's been doing courses for women. She is a sex educator and many other things, a coach. And but she talks about how important that is, that to verbalize, you know, as you're noticing her turn on increase.
are you finding men opening up more to have these conversations, like the work that you're doing? And they are good.
Absolutely. And maybe it's just the nature of my work, and maybe I track those folks anyway. But especially younger men, to be honest. But I think there's interest in the older men. I'm a Gen Xer, so I feel like my age, I'm like right at a turning point. It's like the men my age can kind of go either way into their attitudes about sexuality, but the younger ones tend to be way more interested in pleasing a woman, a woman's pleasure, all of that. The older ones, I notice like a little ego sometimes, or they don't. And you talk about this too, so I think you have a good grasp on it. So I'm just appreciative to any of the men who would open themselves up and just like, you know, say to their goddess, to their woman, like to their partner, teach me your body, like teach me how it works, or let's experiment. And you really can't go wrong. But once you get into that idea of, oh, if she's giving me feedback or she's telling me what she likes or doesn't like, it means I'm doing something wrong. You're already in a bad, you're going down the wrong the wrong road. It's not about that, because what she liked last week she might not want today too. So that's the other thing. And it's okay.
But humbling yourself.
Yeah, but and then there is the basic anatomy and technique. So you talk about the kunyaza technique, which I have not experienced. Now I have to. I gotta pick. I'm currently not in a partnership, so I'm not able to practice that right now. But like that is something that I look forward to one day. And yeah, it's really intriguing to even the specificity that you go into at the book, with even like the zigzag pattern and the tapping. And of course now my curious mind wants to like see it, or like, how does it actually work? And I have to check out the documentaries that you mentioned too, Sacred Waters.
I think one of the things, the fascinating thing, so even before because I only came across the kunyaza practice, I think 2016, but prior to kunyaza, I'd been practicing, you could say, some form of kunyaza, like in the sense of using my penis to pleasure a woman. It's something that I did without knowing it actually was kunyaza, if that makes sense. But one of the things that when you do the kunyaza practice, this is what I told men as well, because you are delaying gratification in terms of delaying penetration, it helps you last longer in the bedroom as well, because you're delaying thinking about penetrative intercourse. So you're pleasuring your lady, which is obviously most important, but also you're enjoying the experience as well, because you're controlling the pleasure that you're experiencing, because again, you're massaging you're using the gland, which is obviously the most sensitive part of the penis. So you're getting a sensation, but at the same time, you're able to control yourself. And that's something that I think, not only do you get the benefit of obviously the woman enjoying herself in the bedroom, but also you get to enjoy yourself, but also it helps you kind of like last, because again, you're not thinking so much about penetrative intercourse and how long I kind of have to last in the bedroom. So that's why even the feedback that I've received from it, both from men and women alike, it's been generally quite positive. And again, it's because it's now a new technique or new sexual script, rather than just thinking about different positions that I think a lot of people are kind of possessed about, like obsessed about how many positions can I do in the bedroom. So
and going back to your talk about even religion and how that might impact our cultural notions. I had a boyfriend who was Muslim, and he had his first girlfriend. I think they were together maybe 3 years. It was very wrong for him to deflower her. Like, she needed to be a virgin or her dad would probably kill him, right? So they did not have penetrative intercourse, but they did everything else. So I was like, that's not really virginity. Like, I was him on it. He's like, yes, it was. Yes, and I was like, okay, whatever. It didn't matter, because like even him as a younger man who did not have a lot of partners, he was just a phenomenal lover, because he spent so many years doing all the other things, but and so I'm like, I have no complaints. I am all about the virginity culture. If this is what the outcome of it is, like, I am not here to judge. And then it kind of like and I was orgasmic every single time with him, because of that. There was no pressure at all for that penetrative sex or experience, and it was such a small piece of the whole of our sexual relationship. But he grew up in the Middle East, so he grew up in the Middle East, and so it's a different culture. And he even apologized, like, I'm sorry if it's weird the way that I have sex, because he's comparing it to the American ideal. And I was like, oh no, like more men need to learn to have sex this way. It would be preferable. And then I thought, all those lucky like virgins, when they're married, they're not really virgins, but technically they are. They're not missing out on anything. Like, I used to feel sorry, and then you have American women who have been penetrated for like 2 pumps and like experienced no pleasure, and now she gets shamed for not being a virgin. I'm like, oh my gosh, we have to really look at what's really happening.
It's really interesting you're saying that, because with a lot of, we have that same phenomenon here in the Europe. But what happens many times is a lot of those men who, when they do have sex, whether by way of marriage or what have you, then they adopt whether you want to call it the Western model, or they're just straight penetrative intercourse. and they'll forego everything that they were doing beforehand. So it's like, whilst it was quite strange prior to actually having sex, they're doing everything apart from penetrative intercourse. But then when they now do have sex, it's all about penetrative intercourse and all of the other things that their previous female partners enjoyed more. They don't do that anymore, kind of thing. And that's something that I think even for Westerners as well, growing up, whether it's, like I said, by way of fingering or oral sex or different activities that we do other than before we have sex, penetrative intercourse, we forego that when we're now actually having sex. So it does happen as well amongst, even in the Western world as well. With younger, you can argue that maybe some adolescents are probably pleasuring their female partners more than when they become adults, because in their mind it's all about intercourse now. Now it's for big boy activity, so to speak, as opposed to what they were doing when they were younger.
Big boy activity. And then also going back to something that you mentioned too, again, with the older, maybe Gen X and older men, is it used to be, and I know it, even I'm 40, I'll be 44, I'm 43 now, but when I was in my 20s, it was like, it was very rare for men to, not very rare, but less rare for men to engage in oral sex and things like that. Whereas, you know, I think now, you know, with your question of like culture, his culture changing, it's pretty much that's on the table. Like that's kind of a given. And I think that's shifted a lot. And I've had like Gen X and older men say, oh no, I'm not, if I did that, I'm not telling my boys about it. Like that is, in our circle, that is not acceptable to go down on a woman. And I'm like my mind is blowing. Like, are you serious? Like, how is that a cultural notion that's not, that you, I mean, knowing that that's primarily how women orgasm is through manual or oral stimulation. It's just mind blowing to me.
I mean, it's still an issue. I'm 36 now, and I mean, when I was growing up, maybe because my circle of friends was like, we all wanted to do it, so there wasn't like much of a hang up but amongst a number of my male other friends, it's like, you don't talk about it, or you only do perform oral sex to a woman that, or girlfriend, a long-term girlfriend, or like potentially when you're going to get married. And some men still have that mentality, unfortunately. And some men from different parts of the world, like for example in a number of men from Jamaica, or like their family from Jamaica, because of there's culturally it's kind of seen as something that men don't do, but they would like to receive it. That's why a number of men from that part of the world, or like their family from that part of the world, is still kind of seen as, we don't do that kind of practice. I'm not sure if you're even familiar with what was the name of that producer, DJ Khaled, when he had that viral video when he was saying that as the king, you know, he expects his wife to perform oral sex on him, but he doesn't do it to his wife because there's different rules for men and women. And there are a number of men that unfortunately still have that backward mindset that it's, again, even with someone they're in a long-term relationship with, that she should pleasure him, but there's no way he's going to pleasure her that way, and he thinks that his penis is enough, kind of thing. Even if a woman were to express that that's the easiest way for her to experience an orgasm, for a lot of men it's just like, no, my penis is enough, kind of thing. So I think that needs to, culture, I think that kind of needs to change.
It's me, and maybe it's, in some ways it's kind of a non-issue, because if a man declares that, like he declares that, he's outing himself as like no woman wants to be with him after he said that, you know. It's like, oh, my pleasure doesn't matter, I'm gonna be stuck, like, you know, with this person who expects to be, you know, pleasure but it's not going to return the favor. It's very narcissistic, right? And so thinking about that, like you're just gonna have to let him he's missing out, the poor guy, he's missing out on so much, you know, and just like not knowing how to open up his partner to have her be in that full expression. And I know that, you know, men, it's sacred, like a woman and a man, but especially because it's more elusive for a woman to reach orgasm when she's in the throes of pleasure, whether it's an orgasm or, you know, extended massive orgasm, to quote one of the books on this, is just that steady state of like intense bliss throughout the whole sexual encounter. It's a sacred thing to be a part of. And I'm sad for a man who, you know, thinks that he can just, you know, throw her the dick for a couple minutes and that's gonna be good enough, and she's gonna be screaming and wild. It's just not logical. It's just not logical. So it just tells you where he's at, you know, or whoever else is saying that. And it's kind of like, okay, you're not a dating potential, you know? So they're shooting.
Yeah, it is a shame, but I'll be honest, I'm not surprised because a lot of men are selfish in the bedroom, and they admit to being selfish, like they're not concerned. Because the way they see it is that as long as I'm being pleasured, as long as I'm reaching climax, and that's why I think it's important that obviously women are empowered and women demand or expect to be pleasured. Because if you've got a situation where a number of women aren't demanding to be pleasured in the bedroom or not speaking up, and they are faking orgasms and faking pleasure and faking moans and stuff like that, and the man is thinking he's doing a good job, then he's not going to even think about changing, because as far as he's concerned, he's having a pleasurable experience and he thinks she is as well. So why does he need to do more by oral sex or doing any other sexual activity? That's the thing. So
right. And back to even patriarchy, I always say, and I don't know if you've watched any of the videos with Kirti and I, but I say that I think women are some of the biggest upholders of patriarchy, because they shame and they, you know, they criticize other women, they hold other women back, these sorts of things. And as far as sexual shaming, as a woman, I've experienced more of it definitely from women than men. I mean, men tend to be more open to a woman's full expression, in my experience and my personal experience as a personal and professional. And if a woman keeps faking it, and most of the time she'll fake it because she's bored and she just wants to get it over with and have some kind of way to complete the act, she'll fake it, but then he doesn't know any different. And then it never gets better, because how does she go back from that? You know, when she fakes it, then how does she say, actually, I need this or whatever else? But she's doing it because she already gave up. You know, if she's faking it, she's already given up, sort of thing. And that's really sad. And if women don't stop doing that, don't stop faking, we're never gonna, those guys are never gonna figure it out. And you're not giving him an opportunity to figure it out. So I think that's really important. And then also along with that, there's I don't know if you saw the meme, I can't even remember where it came from, but it was really funny. She's like, I'm not a squirter, but I tell him I am, so he'll try harder. It's about, like, you know, again, like using some kind of deception, you know, to get him to do whatever. So women are interesting that way.
And in terms of, you mentioned that women upholding the patriarchy, why do you think that is? Or like slut shaming women more than men, why do you think that is?
Well, I think that I don't even know how patriarchy started, honestly. I think it was a political thing. I think, you know, again, with you saying that men are more interested in being selfish or their pleasure, I think the only man maybe that's really, truly more interested in his pleasure is sort of already looking at a woman as an accessory or an object. And then that's another thing with Gina Ogden's research, is she said power is one of the things that, so I already mentioned safety, nurturing, what was the third one? I can't remember, but then it's power and pleasure. So power is like, how does a woman come to terms with being considered the second sex? Because that is going to affect her self-esteem. It's going to affect her body confidence. It's going to affect like how much she can open up in the bedroom. And so if a man is just focused on his pleasure, then she's already like, oh, I'm the second sex, I'm the accessory, I'm his outfit for today, I'm the flavor of the day. And that's just not a turn on to anyone, you know, when you are objectified in that way. And yet our culture, our movies, our videos, everything, just porn, it just keeps reinforcing that idea. So it's subconscious programming. So it's like who originated that? I don't know, but there's so many people upholding it. And I even thought while I was reading your book too, when you talked about the what was the term? I actually took some notes too. Let me see if I wrote it down. It had to do with bisexual arousal pattern, I think. Yeah, that's what it was. The psychology of female desire and the bisexual arousal pattern. And the research that you mentioned with showing sexual acts to men, and women, even though they claimed they weren't aroused, showed physiological arousal with woman on woman sexual activity. And I wonder if that is partly because of the way that it's shown. Women are over sexualized in our culture. Women are thought of as like candy and this and everything, and and it's like we're fed that too. So it's I wonder if it feeds into what we're told to want and desire, and then it impacts our behavior. I don't know. And I'm saying that as a bisexual woman myself. So it was interesting to think about that piece. So I don't know. I mean, there's so much to uncover, and it was so validating to read your book too, and have you talk about like how even researchers don't want to touch the subject. And I'll tell you, I've been paused in my dissertation at this phase for 3 years, no progress for 3 years, because I couldn't get a committee together. Because the first person that I had as my chair, she was all on board when I was going to study spirituality and synchronicity, but when I shifted it to sexual spiritual energy and kundalini and all of this, she's like, I'm no longer interested in that topic. And I'm like, oh, bummer, but I get it. And I just had a really hard time assembling a crew that could get it, wanted to be attached to this research. And then of course, all the shaming from, family and other people who don't really get where I'm coming from. But I feel that it's so important to get this out. And I've shared very openly, even about my own personal experiences today. And I do that because I feel like it sort of normalizes it for others. And then, they can feel more normal, and they can feel more empowered in the bedroom as well.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear about your pitch. I'm hoping that you get
now. I got
oh, good.
Yeah,
good.
We're moving.
I've heard of a number of people that, and again, for various reasons, why a number of like institutes and university and colleges are kind of afraid anytime the topic of sexuality, especially female sexuality, is brought up. And that's why I think it's important that those of us in the field that are doing the work that we're doing to kind of persevere, because it is going to take a while to kind of change people's hearts and minds, because there is this fear with when female sexuality is kind of brought up. But I think it can be, I think the progress that we are making, and again, it's normalizing that it's not something that, even if it is somewhat mysterious, it's not something that we should be intimidated or afraid by. It's something that, if anything, I think we should be inspired by. So again, just please persevere in the work that you're doing, and know that hopefully the work that you're going to be doing is going to be beneficial not only for your generation, but for future generations to come, because I think that's ultimately what it's about. It's about changing the narrative and inspiring people for future generations. So what do you think about, because this is something that I received a question about recently. I wanted to get your perspective about men faking orgasms and men suffering from performance anxiety, because a number of women, even when I've put it out like on Instagram and things like that, like memes or the stories, that a number of women don't believe that men actually, a number of men do have performance anxieties, and a number of men, whether they know that, whether it's faking orgasm or fake pleasure, that is something that some men do, because this idea that all men are simple or quite simplistic, especially in terms of our arousal, that's not always the case. And there are some men who, like I said, suffer from performance anxiety, or even pretend that they're enjoying sex for whatever reason. That's something that I think a lot of women find quite hard to kind of grasp and understand, because they think that we want sex all the time, and if a woman's aroused or interested and he doesn't want it, there must be something wrong with him. And there are even men that are ashamed as well. So, and that's not really something that is spoken about enough as well, kind of thing, where there are men that, like I said, who do suffer from performance anxiety, and maybe are not even enjoying themselves in the bedroom, but because they're with an attractive woman, they feel that they have to perform. And this is why even sometimes with some men, they will prefer to even watch porn as opposed to having relations with a woman in the bedroom, kind of thing. Have you come across that in the work that you're doing?
Totally. Yeah, I've seen a lot of that. So I think it can manifest as, like they're watching porn because they have intimacy issues, or they've been watching porn so long that they can't get turned on by average, normal, slower, not so intense sex, and they can't get an erection, they can't stay hard, they can't orgasm. I've had men say they can't orgasm with a condom on. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but I believe that it's probably true. I've seen it where men have premature ejaculation because they're anxious, or they even might be not having an issue until there's an anxious situation in the relationship, and then they start premature ejaculating out of the blue. I've also, in my probably late 20s, I had this very good male guy friend who was like, and I think you mentioned this for shofar too, like younger men are just looking like, how many women can I be with? And, he was in the military and the Navy too. So it's like that same thing, like, oh, we're off the ship, go score or whatever else. And then he got to a certain age, like 32, and he was like, I'm just not interested anymore. I can't even get attracted to a woman unless she has a brain or unless she has something interesting to say. And I was like, welcome to being a woman, like welcome to our world. And it's true, if you read books like, I think it's called not Attached, Love Factually. There's a book called Love Factually. She's a social scientist researcher, and she is not trained in relationships and sexuality, but because she was applying her social science research training to her own dating life, she just uncovered all this information and decided to publish a book on it. And it was a little bit depressing because she talked about how men tend to value youth and attractiveness, and women tend to value material wealth and status. And they'll be more forgiving of like, if he's attractive or not, or if he's smart or not, or whatever else, if he has the nice car and the good job or whatever. And I was like, wow, are we all really that superficial? But perhaps statistically right now we are. But again, in the younger generation, I see the desire, arousal, sexual, whether we want to call it sexual dysfunction or whatever, happening a lot more in the younger generation than prior when I was younger. And also perhaps it's cultural shift, because I think men change as they get older and they sort of, to use your words, develop a more holistic view of sex. So I feel like I've seen it all. And then I have clients that, maybe they don't end up working with me, but they call me and ask me about their issue and if I can help them with that. So I've heard a lot of different things, but I think it's rarely a physiological problem. And so to answer, the question, can every woman squirt, which you already did answer, I think, yeah, I agree with you. Yes. I think every woman is physically capable. Is she emotionally capable? That's a big knot to untangle. Is she, what else is going on? And so the work that I do is really working there, not with the physical. And the same thing with men. I think there's rarely a physiological problem. Sometimes there is. And eating like a lot of sugar and the plastics in the environment can kill testosterone, and GMOs and pesticides, all that stuff can lower testosterone and increase hormones that mimic estrogen. So that might be one of the physiological issues. When there is one, but I think it's usually dynamics, programming, family stuff, shame. Oh, the shame.
Stigma. I agree, 100%.
Yeah. Well, I want to be mindful of your bedtime because I don't know how late you normally stay up. I know that you stayed up late to be here. I'm just like so honored. I was so excited to talk to you. And I don't know if there's anything else that you feel we should cover to complete this talk tonight. I definitely would love to talk to you again and just go deeper.
We've covered a lot, to be honest.
Yeah.
No, and I'm glad, because I wanted to, obviously, like the actual question itself, that was very easy to answer, like in terms of can every woman squirt, but I wanted to have like a real conversation, which I think we've had, and we've covered so many topics. And I definitely would like to speak to you again. But I think for the topic at hand, I think we've covered quite a lot, and I do appreciate you giving me the time to speak on your platform. I do appreciate it. And
Well, everyone was very excited to meet you and very excited to hear what you had to say. I've been talking up your book and getting lots of personal messages. I'm like, just get the book. Honestly, you have to get the book. You will not be disappointed. And, you know, for people watching right now that are interested in the actual mechanics of it or how it happens, this kunyaza practice, you do have diagrams and, you know, different explanations in the book. And I think it's worthwhile. I'm excited to, like I said, one day try it out. And oh, that's one of my questions for you. I saw that you were in LA doing some sort of kunyaza workshop not too long ago. Do you actually teach the practice or the technique, or you more so talk about, like we've been talking tonight, everything that goes behind it?
No, I actually do. That's something I should have mentioned. Yeah, I actually do some workshops. I was actually planning to be in LA. I had a couple of workshops with Vida Guerra, is a model and she's a Reiki healer. We had a couple of workshops. Originally it was supposed to be in March and we pushed that forward because of COVID to July, then to September. We're thinking of doing one online, but I prefer to maybe do like whenever I can fly out to America. I'm planning to, as soon as like the travel ban is lifted, I'm planning to hold a couple of workshops in Los Angeles and potentially one in Miami as well. So, but yeah, I do workshops. I do workshops on kunyaza. And I think when you have workshops, especially, as much as it's great having like these Zoom calls, but when you see someone and you can look at someone in the eyes and there's face to face, it's a bit different. I prefer like a more of an intimate setting because then you can really kind of speak about the practice and different things and techniques, and especially with men, because what I find is with a number of men, when I do some workshops which are obviously mixed gendered, and some workshops which are just for men only. I find when men are in the presence of women, especially when I'm speaking about sex, they generally keep quiet. They don't like to say anything, and then as soon as the workshops end, they'll come to me or they'll message me, and then they'll actually say what they want to say. So that's why sometimes I do workshops with men by themselves, or do some workshops with women alone, or mixed genders kind of thing. But yeah, I do some workshops, and I'm planning. I might do an online workshop, like I said, some later on this year. But if not, I definitely will be hopefully coming to LA soon, whenever the travel ban, like I said, is lifted, to do some workshops. So stay tuned.
I definitely look forward to that, and keep me posted about any online ones, because I will let my people know. I'm sure that they'd be really interested to participate. And
Yeah, sure.
and then follow you on Instagram. It's Habeeb Akande. Your page is awesome. Lots of great content, lots of clips. The documentary that you mentioned, the Orgasm Gap, Sacred Waters, I have not checked them out yet, but I'm looking forward to it. In fact, I was joking with a friend of mine who also ordered your book, by the way, and he was like, oh yeah, I already ordered it. I'm like, I don't have time to read. I got the stack of books for my dissertation, but I really am interested and I don't want to buy it because then I won't read it. And I'm like, who am I kidding? I'm gonna read it like the minute it comes to the house.
I mean, as much as I would appreciate people to buy the book and read it, you can definitely check out the BBC documentary, The Orgasm Gap, and it's also on YouTube. Well, the YouTube one is about like 15 minutes, but the full documentary, The Orgasm Gap, is on BBC World Service. I was also part of that. And then there's a Sacred Water documentary, which is online as well, which you definitely should check out. But yeah, thank you again, Natasha, for inviting me. And again, anyone's interested, yeah, Kunyaza, The Secrets of Female Pleasure, go and check it out on Amazon. So.
Yeah, thank you so much. Again, honored, such a pleasurable conversation. And I hope that we can do a part 2 sometime in the near future. I would really like that.
Most definitely. Thank you very much, Natasha. I'll speak to you soon.
Good night.
Take care. Bye.